The boy always sat at table 7, not because anyone assigned him there, not because the cafeteria had a seating chart or a rule about where 5th graders were supposed to land their trays. He sat there because table 7 was the one nearest the back wall, tucked under the fire exit sign, where the light from the big windows barely reached and the noise from the rest of the room fell away. He sat there because no one else wanted it. He sat there, Nia figured, because he had learned that being easy to overlook was its own kind of shelter. His name was Caden. She learned that from the laminated roster she checked every morning before the first bell. Caden Merritt, Grade 5, dietary flag, nut allergy. She had written it in her own hand on a piece of masking tape she stuck to the edge of her serving cart so she would remember. She was Nia Cole, and she had been the lead cafeteria worker at Glenbrook Elementary for 6 years. She knew every face in that building. She knew which kids brought lunch from home in princess-themed bags and which ones came through her line with the hollow-eyed look of children who had not eaten since yesterday. She knew the ones who loaded their trays up because they could, and the ones who took only what they thought they were allowed, careful and apologetic, as if eating was something they needed permission for. Caden was none of those things exactly. He came through her line quietly, chose what he chose, and paid with the school account card his father apparently loaded each Monday with exactly the right amount for 5 lunches. Not $1 more. The account was never short, and it was never generous. It was precise. Nia noticed things like that. Precision, she had learned, was sometimes the only involvement some parents could manage. What she noticed next was that he didn't always finish. Not because he didn't want to. She could see the difference between a child who pushed food around out of boredom and a child who pushed it around because something was sitting wrong on his chest that afternoon. Caden ate the way some people read, focused inward, like the food was almost beside the point and he was somewhere else entirely. Some days he cleaned the plate. Some days he ate half a sandwich and stared at the table for 10 minutes before the bell released him. On those days, he dropped his tray at the window, the quiet thank you that Nia heard every time, even over the noise, because it was one of those voices that was careful not to take up too much space. She started keeping back a small portion on the days she could see it coming. It was not a policy. It was not something she announced to Brenda or entered into any log. It was a private decision she made on a Tuesday in October when she watched Caden eat 4 bites of a turkey sandwich and then sit very still for the remaining 11 minutes of the lunch period. Not because the food was bad, but because something in his day had used up the appetite. She had seen enough of that particular kind of stillness to know what it cost a child to sit in a room full of noise and volume and the easy social ease of other children and feel none of that adjacency, nothing dramatic. A half sandwich tucked in a paper sleeve, a piece of cornbread wrapped in foil, a small container of the soup that was always better on the second day anyway. Sat and she would hold it behind the steam table until the room cleared and the other kids had cycled through, and then she would set it at the end of the pass-through where Caden was always among the last to return his tray. She never made a production of it. She never announced it or held it up or said anything beyond, "Go ahead, baby, that one's for you." And she said it the way she said most things that mattered. Quiet and plain, like it was nothing. She had not, it should be said, cleared this with anyone because there was nothing to clear. Nia had discretion of the portions that remained after the service period. She used it. This was true of every cafeteria worker in the district, and the fact that most of them did not use it the way she was using it was simply a difference in what each person noticed and what they decided to do about it. The first time, he blinked at her like she had spoken in a language he was still learning. The second time, he said thank you so carefully she had to look away. By the third week, he accepted it the way children accept things that have become reliable. Not with surprise, but with a small particular settling, the kind that happens in a body that has stopped bracing for the thing to disappear. She noticed this most on a Friday in November, when he picked up the wrapped cornbread before she had even finished setting it down. The gesture automatic, now already incorporated into the shape of his afternoon. She thought, there it is. That's the thing. Reliable presence, the simplest thing in the world, the hardest to provide. What Nia did not know, and would not know for nearly 8 months, was that Caden Merritt's father was Raymond Merritt. and he owned every commercial property in a 6-block radius of the school. He owned the strip mall 2 streets over where the dry cleaners and the nail salon and the tax preparation office all paid rent. He owned a parking structure on Calvin Boulevard that the district used during school events. He sat on the board of the Glenbrook Community Development Fund, which had for the past 3 years held the service contract for the district's food program, meaning the kitchen equipment Nia cooked on, the refrigeration unit she stocked, the contract that employed her. All of it fell in some chain of 3 or 4 financial links under Raymond's name. She did not know this. She was not the kind of person who tracked those things. She was the kind of person who noticed a boy eating alone. If you have ever watched a child learn that someone is paying attention, you know what it looks like. It does not look like relief, not at first. It looks like suspicion, like they are waiting for the catch, like they are measuring how long before the thing is taken back. Leave a comment if you have ever been that child or if you have ever loved one. Because what Nia was giving Caden was not just food. It was something quieter and harder to name, the consistent, unremarkable proof that someone had seen him. The school year moved the way school years do, in the particular rhythm of minor holidays and benchmarking weeks, and the slow drag of February. Nia had her own life running alongside her days at Glenbrook. It was a life she had assembled carefully and managed with the same precision she brought to her kitchen. She was 37 years old. She had been raising Kaya mostly on her own since Kaya was 4, and she had made that work through a combination of genuine competence and the particular discipline of a person who cannot afford the luxury of letting things slip. She did not romanticize the difficulty of it. She did not dramatize it either. She simply did the next thing and the next thing after that. She had her mother, Rosalie, who lived 20 minutes away, and who Nia checked on 3 mornings a week before driving to the school. Rosalie had a bad hip and a worse temper and a deep and specific pride that made her refuse most forms of help that felt like charity. Nia navigated this the way she navigated most things carefully, without making it into a performance. She brought groceries in grocery bags. She fixed the dragging screen door without announcing she was going to fix it. She left a 20 in the kitchen drawer under the dish towels where her mother would find it and be able to pretend she'd simply overlooked it. She and Rosalie had a complicated love, the kind that gets shaped by proximity and need and the long memory of everything said in rooms when there was no time to be careful. They did not talk about it. They sat at Rosalie's kitchen table on Tuesday mornings with coffee and the radio on low. And sometimes they talked about nothing in particular, and sometimes they sat in a silence that had stopped needing to be filled. Nia drove home from those mornings with the feeling not quite peace but close to it, of a thing that had been allowed to be what it was. Nia's rent had gone up twice in 3 years. She drove a car that was 11 years old and had a heater that worked on the passenger side only. She had applied once to the district's assistant nutrition coordinator position, the one that came with a small pay bump and a title, and had not gotten it. She did not know why. She made exactly enough to cover what she needed to cover, with a thin margin she kept in a savings account she tried not to touch. She was not struggling in the way that breaks a person. She was managing in the way that wears one thin. On the mornings she arrived early to prep the kitchen before the delivery trucks pulled up and before the noise of the building populated around her. She sometimes stood at the big prep counter with a coffee and thought about her daughter Kaya, who was 12 and already asking why they couldn't afford the camp the other girls at her school talked about. Nia answered these questions honestly, in the quiet way she answered most things, and Kaya, who was her mother's child in more ways than the obvious ones, accepted the honesty without pressing on it. There was one afternoon in March when Caden sat at table 7 longer than usual. The room had emptied. The other kids had gone to recess or back to classrooms. The volunteer monitors had cycled out. Nia was breaking down the steam table, scraping trays, running the first cart back toward the kitchen, when she noticed he was still there. He was not eating. He was not crying. Not exactly. His chin was down and his shoulders were very still in the way that comes right before something gives. She dried her hands on her apron and walked over. She did not sit down because she had learned that sitting down sometimes made things bigger, and she did not know yet how big this was. She said, "You doing okay?" He did not answer right away. Then he said, "My dad forgot to pick me up yesterday." He remembered later, he said it the way children say things they have been turning over in their mouths for a day and a half, trying to find the right way to put them down. Nia stood there for a moment. Then she said, "That's a hard feeling." He nodded. She went back to the kitchen and came back with a small bowl of the oatmeal cookies she kept for afternoons. She set them between them on the table, which meant she was sitting now, apron and all, in the nearly empty cafeteria in the middle of a Thursday. She did not stay long. She stayed long enough. When the office assistant came looking for him 10 minutes later to say his ride was here, Caden picked up one last cookie and wrapped it in his napkin, and when he passed Nia's cart at the door, he said, "Thank you, Miss Nia," and it was the first time he had ever used her name. She thought about that on the drive home. She thought about all the children she had fed over the years, the small moments that accumulated without ceremony, and she wondered sometimes if they registered at all beyond the moment itself. She was not looking for gratitude. She had never been in this for any return. She did her work, and she did it right, and she believed, in the quiet, unargued way she believed, most things, that doing right when no one was watching was its own kind of answer to a question the world was always asking. April brought the district's annual food program review, which was the kind of institutional event that Nia knew about, mainly because it meant an inspector came through the kitchen and she had to pull out the logbooks. She was not anxious about it. Her kitchen was clean. Her records were accurate. She had never failed an inspection. What she did not know was that this particular review was connected to the contract renewal for the food program vendor, the company that supplied the district's staple ingredients, and that the renewal decision was being shaped in a conversation happening 3 blocks away in a conference room she would never enter, between the district assistant superintendent and the man who sat on the board of the fund that held that contract. Raymond had requested the meeting himself. He had requested it because of his son. Caden had said something to him at dinner one night in February. They had been eating quietly, as they usually did since the divorce, the two of them in the big kitchen of a house that was too large for 2 people, when Caden said, "Miss Nia keeps food for me when I don't feel hungry." He said it plainly without emphasis, the way children state important things. "She knows when I'm not doing good." Raymond had put his fork down. He said, "Who is Miss Nia?" Caden told him. "The cafeteria, the back table. The wrap sandwich and the oatmeal cookies and the afternoon. He had been upset and she had sat with him and not made it into a thing." He said it all in the straightforward way of a child who did not yet understand that what he was describing was exceptional. To him, it had simply become part of how his days worked. Raymond did not say much. He cleared the table. He helped Caden with his homework. He put him to bed. He sat in his study afterward for a long time. Raymond was 51 years old and had not cried in front of anyone in more than 2 decades. He did not consider this a point of pride. He had simply, at some point in his mid-30s, run out of the particular kind of energy the public vulnerability required, and the habit had calcified. He cried sometimes privately in the way careful men do, without any clear precipitating event, in the car or in the shower, the feeling arriving like weather and passing the same way. He cried the night after Caden told him about Miss Nia. He would not have been able to say exactly why. It was not straightforward gratitude, though gratitude was in it. It was something closer to the grief of recognizing a gap after the fact, of understanding that his son had been seen by someone else's consistency before he had figured out how to show up consistently himself. He was not, by the easy read of his life, a sentimental man. He had built what he built through precision and patience and an ability to see structures where other people saw only confusion. He was good at organizations and bad at proximity. The divorce had not been a surprise to anyone, including himself. He had loved his wife in the particular way of men who show up consistently for external obligations and are confounded by domestic ones, and she had waited 3 years for him to find his way into the house they shared, and then she had stopped waiting. Caden had been 7. Raymond had custody on alternating weeks. The weeks Caden was with him had a particular texture he had never been able to soften. He was competent in them, logistically speaking. The refrigerator was stocked. The school clothes were clean, the routine was consistent. There was something he could not manufacture, a warmth in the dailiness, the easy low-level chatter of a parent who knew how to fill the air between activities with something other than efficient silence. And he knew it was missing the same way. You know, a picture frame is crooked even when you can find a level. He had tried, in his way. He asked about school. He asked about the teachers. He had once suggested they cook dinner together, and they had done it, Caden reading the recipe aloud, while Raymond measured, and it had been a genuinely good hour. And then he had not known how to repeat it without it feeling deliberate, and so the spontaneity that the gesture had required never came back. He ran those weeks the same way he ran everything, with logistical competence and an honest deficit of imagination about what a child actually needed beyond the provision of his material circumstances. He loaded the lunch account on Monday mornings, he signed the permission slips, he showed up to the events he knew about. He had forgotten the pickup in February because of a conference call that ran long, and he had felt the specific shame of a man who knows he is failing at something but cannot locate the adjustment. What Caden had told him at dinner was the first time in a long time that someone outside the family had paid his son the particular attention that Raymond had not figured out how to give consistently. That sat in him like something with weight. He did not make decisions quickly. He had learned a long time ago that the decisions he made quickly were the ones he eventually had to revise. He spent 2 weeks simply thinking. He asked Caden carefully more questions. Not interrogating, just listening. What did Miss Naya make? What was the table by the back like? Did he always eat there? Caden answered freely, which told Raymond that none of this felt loaded to the boy, that it had simply become a good and reliable part of his day. In March, Raymond drove by the school at lunchtime and sat in his car in the parking structure his property management company leased to the district. He did not go in. He wasn't sure what he would have said. He watched the building and thought about what happened inside it and about how little of Caden's daily life he could actually picture. The lights were on in the cafeteria wing. He could see them from where he was parked. On the second level, the wide institutional windows, bright against the grey afternoon. Children's voices reached him in brief waves when the wind shifted, the high collective noise of 100 kids eating together, and somewhere in that building his son was at a table by the back wall, probably under a fire exit sign, and a woman he had not yet met was making sure he ate. He thought about the lunch account. He had loaded it Monday mornings for 3 years without missing a single week, and he had considered that sufficient. Precise and sufficient. He understood now that precision was not the same as presence. He understood that his son had found presence in a cafeteria worker's wrapped cornbread and a few quiet minutes at the end of the lunch period, because his father had not figured out how to bring it home. It was not a comfortable thing to sit with. He sat with it anyway. The food program review in April was Raymond's first clear opportunity to do something. He had been on the Community Development Fund board long enough to understand the leverage points, and this contract renewal was one of them. The contract itself was worth $400,000 annually across all district sites, covering stable ingredients, equipment maintenance, and the operational scaffolding that most people in the district building never thought about because it had never failed loudly enough to demand attention. He did not go into that meeting with a plan to reward Nicole specifically because he did not yet know her full name or her specific role beyond what Caden had told him. He went in with a broader intention to ask questions about the people who actually ran the kitchens, the daily workers, the ones whose names did not appear in the contract language, but who were the reason the program functioned at all. The assistant superintendent, a careful woman named Dr. Okafor, had been surprised by the line of questioning. Raymond was known for asking about financials, about vendor relationships, about compliance timelines. He was not known for asking whether the kitchen staff had adequate equipment, whether their compensation had kept pace with the district's cost of living adjustments over the past 3 years, whether there was a pathway to the nutrition coordinator positions for people who had been doing the work at the ground level for years without advancement. Dr. Okafor had pulled up what she could. She gave him what she had. She told him she would look into the rest. He told her he would appreciate that. He said it without pressure, the way he said most things, but Okafor had been working in district administration long enough to understand when a man with Raymond's connections said he would appreciate something, that was a thing worth attending to. The call came on a Tuesday in May. Nia was at the prep counter finishing the last of the morning work before the delivery when her supervisor, a woman named Brenda who had been her supervisor for all 6 years and who communicated mostly through notes left on the refrigerator door, put her head in and said, "Okafor's office called. They want you to come in for a meeting." Friday morning, Nia set down the tray she was holding. Nia said, "About what?" Brenda shrugged. She had the particular mild expression of a woman who has seen a lot of institutional mornings and has made her peace with the fact that most of them are unremarkable. They didn't say. Didn't sound bad. Sounded like a formality. Maybe. Nia nodded and went back to the prep counter. She did not spend the rest of the day worrying about it. Worrying, she had found, was only useful when it was attached to something she could act on, and she could not act on a meeting she had not yet attended. Nia went home that evening and told Kaya, who was doing homework at the kitchen table. Kaya looked up and said, "Did you do something wrong?" Nia said, "I don't think so." Kaya considered this. Then maybe it's good. She was her mother's child. The meeting was in a conference room on the second floor of the district administration building, which Nia had never been inside. Okafor was there, and beside her was a man Nia did not recognize. Broad-shouldered in a dark grey suit, with a careful, watchful expression and close-trimmed, grey-threaded hair. He stood when she came in, which was not something she had expected, and he introduced himself by his full name. And it was only then, hearing the last name, that Nia felt the particular lurch of a piece of information landing in a context she had not prepared for. Merit. She stood very still for a moment. Then she sat down. Okafor explained that the district had conducted a review of its food service program, including an assessment of its staffing structure, compensation benchmarking, and the criteria for advancement into coordinator roles. She said that the review had identified several long-term kitchen workers whose experience and performance record clearly qualified them for positions that had historically been filled through external hires. She said that a funded pathway was being created, beginning in the fall, and that Nia's name had come up consistently across every review the committee had run. Nia said, "I applied for that position." 3 years ago, Okafor said, "I know. That's one of the things we found." There was a pause. Raymond said, "My son talks about you." He said it the way he said most things, direct, without ornament. "He's told me more about your kitchen than he's told me about most of his school year." He looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. "I know that doesn't cover what I'm saying. I'm not sure what does. But I wanted to be here in person." Nia had been prepared for a performance review. She had not been prepared for this. She kept her hands in her lap and looked at this man who owned the parking structure she had pulled into 40 minutes ago, who had apparently been asking questions on her behalf without her knowledge for months, and she felt several things at once that she did not have easy names for. She said, "Caden is a good boy." Raymond nodded. She could see it cost him something to hold still. He was the kind of man who had learned to conduct himself through situations by maintaining the appearance of composure, and right now that composure was doing real work. She said, "He needed one to notice him." "That's all I did." There was a pause that had something honest in it. Raymond said quietly, "That's not a small thing." The pathway Okafor described was real and funded, a paid training period. A formal transition to Assistant Nutrition Coordinator by September, with a title, a raise of $14 an hour, and the possibility of the coordinator role itself within 18 months if the review at the end of the first year went the way they expected it to. There was also a one-time professional development stipend, which Okafor explained was being made available to long-term kitchen staff across all district sites. Nia drove home in the car with the heater that only worked on the passenger side, and she sat in it in front of her building for a few minutes before going in. She was not a woman given to displays. She sat in the quiet and let it settle. The afternoon light was doing that particular thing it did in May, coming in low and warm through the windshield, and the street in front of her building had the end-of-day look of a neighborhood winding down, a man walking a dog, Two kids on bikes moving slow, the sound of someone's radio from an open window above her. She had driven this route so many times, she barely saw it. She saw it now. The specific, ordinary loveliness of a place she had made her life in, the life she had built from what she had, which was not nothing, was never nothing, and would now have a little more room in it. She thought about Caden at table 7. She thought about the first time he had accepted the wrap sandwich without blinking. The new steadiness of it. A child who had stopped bracing. He thought about her mother and Kaya at the kitchen table asking if everything was okay, and the savings account she tried not to touch. She thought about doing the right thing when no one is watching. She went inside. She called her mother first. Rosalie listened without interrupting, which was not her usual mode, and then said, in a voice that was trying to stay level, "Well, it's about time." She called Kaya's father next because they were not together, but they were civil and he would want to know. Then she sat with Kaya at the kitchen table and told her simply that things were going to change a little. For the better, Kaya said, because of the boy who eats alone. Nia looked at her. "I didn't tell you about him." Kaya shrugged. "You came home different on the days you looked out for somebody. I could tell." Her mother's child, entirely. The last week of school, Caden came through the line with a card. It was a folded piece of yellow construction paper with a drawing on the front. Inside he had written in the careful printing of a fifth grader who took the task seriously, "Thank you for always keeping something for me." He had signed it with his full name, the way children do when they are being official. Nia put it on the refrigerator at home, next to Kaya's last report card and a photograph of Rosalie from a long time ago. She started her training in August. The new role came with a different schedule, early mornings in the district kitchen, and a small office with a window that looked out onto the delivery bay, which was not scenic, but was hers. She kept the masking tape roster note from her old cart. She kept the habit of learning every name. There are children in every cafeteria who have learned to make themselves easy to overlook, who have figured out that the back table is quieter and that the space costs nothing and that going unnoticed is at least predictable. They are not invisible. They are waiting in the patient, careful way of children who have been disappointed before for someone to make them real by seeing them. Nia knew something about waiting like that. She had been in that kitchen for 6 years doing work that mattered and watching other people's names move up a list she never reached the top of. She had never made her resentment into something she carried into the room. She had never let it follow her to table 7, kindness without audience. That was the thing. The grace that doesn't keep a record, that doesn't calculate its own return, that shows up on a Tuesday in March with oatmeal cookies and a few minutes of quiet company because a child's chin is down and his shoulders are still and somebody needs to notice. Well, noticed eventually. It usually does, in the end. She still checked the name tapes, she still learned every dietary flag. She walked the news sites with a clipboard and a precise, attentive eye, and when she found the workers who had been doing the job right for years, without recognition, she wrote their names down. She made sure they were seen. Caden started 6th grade at the middle school across the district. Different building, different cafeteria. He sent her a text through his father's phone in October, a brief message that said he had made 2 friends and that the lunch there was not as good. She texted back a single line and a period at the end, the way she said most things that mattered. "You will always have a seat at my table. Did you ever have a person in your life who fed you when you didn't even know you were hungry? Leave a thought in the comments. If this story moved something in you, we have another one waiting that you will not want to miss." This story is a work of fiction. Names, characters, and events are the product of the imagination and are used for storytelling purposes only. The new role changed Nia's mornings more than anything else had in years. She had always been an early riser, the kind of person who arrived before she was required to and used the quiet time to think, to organize the day's work in her head while the building around her was still asleep. Now, the thinking had more room in it. She walked the district kitchen with an eye for what was missing and what could be better, and she found both in abundance. The refrigeration unit on the south wall had been running 2 degrees warm for months, which meant produce spoiled faster than it should, which meant the workers were always compensating, always working around a system that was slightly off. She submitted a maintenance request the first week. It was filled by the second. She sat in small meetings now, meetings where decisions were made about menus and vendors and the schedules of workers she used to stand beside at the steam table. She discovered that she was good at these meetings in a way she had not known because she had never been in one. She asked precise questions. She took notes in a narrow, legible hand. She noticed when a vendor's delivery count did not match the invoice and said so plainly without accusation, which turned out to be exactly the right register for conversations like that. Okafor had mentioned after the third meeting that Nia asked better questions than most people who had been in the role for 10 years. Nia had thanked her and returned to work. There was a kitchen worker named Gloria at one of the elementary sites who reminded Nia of herself at the beginning. Not in manner, they were different kinds of quiet, but in the quality of attention she brought to her work. She had been at the site for 4 years, knew every child's dietary restriction without checking the clipboard, had twice noticed things in the food delivery that would have caused problems if she hadn't caught them. Nia talked to her in October. She said, in the same plain voice she used for most things, "You should know your name has been in some conversations at the district level. Good conversations." Gloria had looked at her for a long moment and then looked away, and Nia recognized that look. The look of someone who had learned not to trust a thing until it had proven itself 3 times over. She understood it. She simply made sure the thing proved itself. She thought sometimes about the accumulation of small, faithful acts and how they compound over time, like interest but warmer. She had not given Caden oatmeal cookies because she expected anything from it. She had not checked on him on the afternoon in March because she was making a calculation. She had done it because he was right there in front of her, and the right thing to do was obvious. The way the right thing usually is, if a person is paying attention and has not let the weight of their own circumstances close their eyes. She was not naive about the connection between what Raymond had observed and what changed for her. She had thought about it enough to be clear-eyed. A man with his reach had taken a problem she had not even brought to him and done something with it, and part of what he had done was right in any case, restoring a pathway that should have existed, correcting a review process that had been quietly wrong for years. She was glad it had been corrected. She was glad it had been corrected for every person who came after her, and not only for her. That mattered. What she held separately and more carefully was the thing Caden's father had said in the conference room. "I wanted to be here in person." She did not sentimentalize it. She was not that kind of woman. She recognized that it had cost him something, that he had worked against a habit in himself to be there, and that cost was not nothing. She gave it the weight it had earned, and she did not add to it. The boy who ate alone was not alone. Because the world was cruel. He was alone because his father was in the particular kind of pain that expresses itself as competence and distance, and because children absorb the architecture of the life around them and make do in it, and because no one had thought to check the back table. She had thought to check the back table that fall. Nia's rent stabilized because the building's new owner, a property group that had acquired the units in August, had locked the existing tenant rates as part of the acquisition terms. She did not know the details of the property group. She did not ask. She mentioned it to her mother offhandedly on one of her Tuesday morning visits, and Rosalie had made a sound that was not quite a word and set a cup of coffee on the counter and changed the subject. Nia let her. The car's heater got fixed at last, both sides, in October. She drove to Rosalie's the following Tuesday morning in a car that was warm from the first minute, and she sat at her mother's kitchen table in her coat with her coffee and thought about all the small things that had shifted, quietly, without ceremony, like furniture rearranged in the night, and you only notice because the path through the room is easier now. Kaya went to the summer camp in June. The application had closed in November, and Nia had submitted it the week she received her first paycheck at the new rate, which covered the tuition without touching the savings account. Kaya had come home from the 2 weeks sun-darkened and loose with relief, carrying a friendship bracelet and a 4-page letter she had written to a girl from another city, and she had sat at the kitchen table and told her mother about every meal they had served in the camp cafeteria because she was her mother's child, and she noticed those things now. Nia listened to every word. She kept the yellow construction paper card on the refrigerator all year. It moved once when she rearranged the photos, ending up slightly higher between Rosalie's old photograph and a new one Kaya had taken at camp that Nia had printed at the pharmacy and taped up with the rest. The drawing on the front of the card was a cafeteria tray. Nia wasn't sure if Caden had drawn it or if it had simply happened the way drawings sometimes happen for children, the hand making what the day contained. Either way, it was accurate. A tray with food on it rendered in the precise and earnest lines of a boy who had wanted to get the thank you right. She went to work, she fed people. She wrote names on masking tape and learned which children carried something extra in their eyes on certain days and which ones needed more than what the menu offered. She brought what she had. She did not wait to be seen. The world had a long memory. She had known that for years. She had simply lived like it was true and let the record take care of itself.